Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Matt Rhule, the Nebraska Cornhuskers, I think have a really good opportunity to go on the road in the Big Ten Conference and kind of grab some of that momentum back they had to start the 2024 season. Obviously, a heartbreaking loss Friday night to Illinois. We hopped on immediately after the football game and kind of recapped what we thought, what we saw. I have some more opinions and takes on that football game that I want to share with you guys as well. You look at this Purdue team, I think they're trying to find their identity. I think they're trying to find their difference makers. Like, this was a Purdue team that was not very good in 2023 and then lost their best player on offense, Deion Burks, to Oklahoma. They lost their best player on defense and Nick Skirtin to Texas A&M. You can tell that they're still trying to get this roster to a Big Ten caliber level. And then you look at Nebraska. This is the first road game for Nebraska, the first road start for Dylan Raiola. I think that is certainly what you're looking at if you're a Nebraska fan. But I want to start on this Nebraska defense, which, at least in my opinion, was the biggest kind of surprise that we saw Friday night in Lincoln, Nebraska against Illinois. So we're going to get into that. Now, before we get into it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and the amount of support y'all have shown the boys, especially the Nebraska fans, the highs and lows to start the 2024 season. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into this one. And let's start with this Nebraska defense. And you're going up against a Purdue offense that I think pretty clearly wants to run the football. They're only scoring 14 points per game. That's 114th in the country. They run the football 55% of the time. And, they run the football relatively well, averaging 5.5 yards per carry. That's top 25 in the country. Two really good running backs, and Devin Maccabee and Reggie Love, who are both averaging over 6 yards per carry. I don't think it's going to be a huge surprise what Purdue wants to do on the offensive side of the football. And quite frankly, this is an opportunity for this Nebraska front seven to rebound from I thought, not so good performance against Illinois, specifically in that front seven, where in the second half, Illinois was really able to run the football on this Nebraska front, which is something that I don't think a lot of Nebraska fans had on their bingo card heading into that football game. This is by far my biggest concern after rewatching and kind of looking at some of the numbers. And I'm a Michigan fan, and there are some similarities between Nebraska and Michigan on the defensive line right now, where you look at the two faces of both of these defensive lines, Ty and Nash for Nebraska and Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant for Michigan, some of the better defensive linemen that you'll see in the country, much less the Big Ten. That being said, both of these programs are trying to find their depth a little bit. And I think for Nebraska, the most concerning storyline coming out of this game, for me at least, is they seem to not have much confidence in the twos and threes on the defensive line. Like, you look at Ty Nash, Ty played 60 snaps, Nash played 53 snaps, that's a lot of snaps for bodies that are that big. But then you look at the twos and say Carroll Jackson had 10, Keona Davis had 5, Elijah Judy only had 2. They're obviously redshirting Riley Van Poppel, so he's not in the rotation. My biggest concern for Nebraska is, what does the depth look like on the defensive line, which quite frankly was a concern that we had heading into the season. Yeah, the starting defensive line for Nebraska, I think, is very good. But you look at the biggest problem I saw in this football game was in the second half. Illinois started to impose their will on the offensive line. And I think that had a lot to do with not Ty and Nash not being good football players, but Ty and Nash just playing so much football in a game where they kind of get worn out towards the second half. This is the exact same thing that Texas was able to do to Michigan week 2 in that football game. And so if you're Nebraska, you got to try to find a rotation where you can keep Ty and Nash healthy, but more importantly, fresh throughout 4 quarters. Nebraska talks about winning the fourth quarter all the time. It's going to be hard to win fourth quarters when Ty and Nash are playing 60 snaps a football game. You got to find guys that you trust, specifically on the inside of the defensive line, that can give you quality rotational snaps to keep guys like Ty and Nash fresh. So when it comes to the fourth quarter, your defense is playing as good as it can be. So that's my biggest concern. I think secondly, and I think this might have to do a little bit with the lack of depth, the pass rush with the front four wasn't as good as we expected it to be. Now, one, Illinois has, I think, a really good offensive line, specifically at the tackle spot. I think they have 2 guys that will be playing on Sundays at some point in the future. We kind of talked about this. One of the biggest critiques we had of the Nebraska defense coming out of 2023 was at times reliant on bringing pressure and blitzes to impact the opposing quarterback. The biggest goal for Nebraska was trying to get Luke Altmaier a little bit uncomfortable. I don't think they did that with their front four. They had to start relying on sending a guy like Say You're Right off the edge, or sending some of your backers to get to Luke Altmaier, which is going to be a problem when you're playing some of the best teams in the Big Ten, when you have to send more than 4 or 5 to get pressure on the quarterback and leave some of your cornerbacks on islands. Look, I thought Nebraska's cornerbacks played, quite well, especially not having Tommy Hill against some really good boundary receivers for Illinois. But when you go play some of the top teams in the Big Ten, like Ohio State, you don't want to consistently have to leave your cornerbacks and defensive backs on islands against elite caliber wide receivers. And so I think Nebraska has to figure out a way where they can consistently get pressure with their front four and be able to drop their guys back in coverage. I thought it worked really well against Colorado. It didn't work very well against Illinois, and I thought that was some of the success Illinois was able to have. And then finally, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but like Tony White got out coached for maybe the first time ever as a Nebraska defensive coordinator. Like there were guys, and I don't know if it was Tony White getting out coached or maybe the players not executing, probably a little bit of both. There were some blown assignments that we're just not used to seeing for Nebraska. One of our biggest takeaways after the first 3 games of the season was this Nebraska defense is just so gelled. Like you can tell they played so much football together in 2023. You can tell that they were going into year 2 with Tony White. You didn't really get that feeling against Illinois. I mean, some blown assignments, tight ends leaking out to the flats, kind of wide open. Barry Lunny, I think, beat Tony White on the chalkboard, so to speak, in terms of play calling and scheme. I still think this Nebraska defense is going to be one of the better units in the Big Ten, but they got to answer some of those questions that we saw kind of rear their ugly heads against Illinois Friday night. Now, you look at Purdue, I don't think they have the difference makers on the outside. You take a look at the passing numbers. They don't throw the football that often. 4.5 yards per pass, that's 128th in the country. A 44% completion percentage, that's 130th. I mean, Hudson Card and Purdue just went on the road to Oregon State. Hudson Card was 7-17 for 59 yards. I don't think this passing attack is going to scare you. I think you're going to see Purdue try to run the football. If you're Nebraska, stop the run, force 3rd and longs, get after the passer. What you've been doing the first couple of games of the season, you want to see them get back to that against Purdue. Flipping to the offensive side of the football, the most disappointing thing about the loss was I think it just covers up for the fact that Dylan has been exceptional as a true freshman. One of the more frustrating aspects about that football game, Matt Rhule mentioned it in the press conference. This offense was hot in the second and third quarter. It just felt like Nebraska couldn't get off the field and give them more touches, give them more possessions. Coach Satterfield, I thought, called a great game. And you know what I mean? Like at the end of the game when Dylan had a wide open pass to probably win that football game, yeah, you can question about maybe we should be running the football. We got kind of 2 downs because we know we have a backup kicker. And so maybe you say it's 3rd and 3. We got 2 downs to get the yards and kind of salt this game away. You can argue that that's maybe where they should have went, but Coach Satterfield dialed up a play. I like that they're being aggressive with Dylan. Like that was something we talked about heading into the season was don't treat this kid like a true freshman. He's much more capable than a true freshman quarterback. He is showing it through the first 4 games. Give him the opportunity to go win you some football games, and that's what Nebraska's doing. Like if you told me they scored 24 points, I would have told you Nebraska won that football game at home Friday night. And again, they probably should have had more points. Obviously, threw a phenomenal football to Isaiah Nayor, who got the ball ripped out of his hands, taking away a touchdown, turning it into an interception. That's a massive swing in that football game. I think Coach Sat's doing a really good job managing Dylan. I think Dylan's doing a really good job running the offense. One thing I'm looking at, if I'm kind of nitpicking here, and you look at this Purdue defense, this is an opportunity for Nebraska to get right here. Purdue's given up 7 yards per carry. That's 131st in the country. They're giving up 351 rushing yards per game. That's 134th. That's dead last in the FBS. Nebraska hasn't been running the football that often. I mean, they're only running the football 51% of the time. That is 70th in the country. What does the identity of Matt Rhule want to look like? It's running the football. Now, I know you have an elite quarterback that you want to lean on, and I'm certainly not arguing against that. But you still want to run the football a little bit more efficiently than Nebraska's been doing. You look at the numbers. 3.7 yards per carry. That's 92nd in the country. I think Dante Dowdle's been running the ball hard, but I'd like to see him probably force a little bit more misses. I think that he is getting clean to the second level, and I think there are some plays that Dante Dowdle has left on the football field. And maybe I'm being too hard on Dante. Maybe it's fair. That was kind of my takeaway from the rushing attack, is I thought on aggregate, Nebraska's running the football, or the offensive line is moving bodies off the line of scrimmage, especially with some of those power and inside zone concepts. I think we got to get a little bit better play from the running back spot. But outside of that, like the way Nebraska's offense is playing, I think you can win a lot of football games. And again, going on the road against a Purdue team that has one of, if not the worst rushing defense in the Power 5, Power 4 now, I think this is a chance for Nebraska to kind of get back to what their identity wants to be of this football team, and that is controlling the line of scrimmage, controlling the time of possession, and running the football. And yeah, you're using Dylan Raiola to hit some explosive plays. I'm not arguing against that, but again, you want to be a run-first team. You want to be a physically imposing team. I'd like to see them get back to that against Purdue Saturday afternoon. Now, getting into the pick, Nebraska 10-point favorites on the road here. I really like Nebraska in the spot. Look, I think this Nebraska team, as frustrating as another one-score loss is for the Nebraska fans, I think it's so evident that this team is getting better. And I think you have a quarterback now that you're kind of confident can win you football games. Where what's the biggest difference in the past with these one-score losses for Nebraska? You just didn't have any quarterback that inspired a ton of confidence. I think you got a winner in Dylan. And I think Nebraska can get right against a Purdue team that I think they just physically outmatch at just about every position on the football field. I think Nebraska's going to run the football. I think they're going to be able to manufacture some explosive plays in the passing attack. And right now, I don't see Purdue, with how one-dimensional they are, moving the football consistently against this Nebraska defense. I think you're going to see a rebound. Again, one sample size game against Illinois where the defense really largely had their worst performance under Tony White. Like, I'm more going to lean towards the other 14, 15 games we've seen of this Tony White defense than the just one rocky game against Illinois. Like, teams are allowed to play bad in certain games. So it's unfortunate it was a bad game against a ranked opponent that you could have won. But I'm going to go Nebraska here to cover the 10 points. And I'm looking for Nebraska to clean up some of that stuff. So that's where we're kind of headed. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys. And we'll talk to y'all later.